Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic? Let's do it. Redditors, what is the absolute most creepiest thing that has ever happened to you, but you couldn't tell anyone because no one would believe you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
When I was maybe 6 or 7, we were visiting family in New Orleans. I was sleeping in a strange room, a strange bed, so I was having trouble getting to sleep. I heard a tapping on the window, softly. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I look at the window and I thought I saw something move that looked like a brimmed hat. It was a split-level home, so whomever it was would have had to have been tall. I woke up my parents and they told me the house was old with wooden floors that creak, and I was imagining things, so go back to bed. In the morning, we found the back gate lock was broken. I got married too young, 21, and then divorced when I was 23. A few months went by and I started having these nightmares. Long story short, a girl in a white dress with brown hair, matted with leaves and dirt, walks into my house, tracking muddy footprints. She stops and stares at the attic stairs, which are down for some reason. I ask her why she's there. She screams and the whole house crumbles. I never saw her face. I had this nightmare almost every night for 3 months. And when I say almost every night, I mean probably 95% of the time. For some reason, I started sleeping in my living room as opposed to the bedroom, and I just wasn't very comfortable in there. So I'm sleeping on my couch one night and wake up around 2 a.m. for no reason. I check my phone and see I have a text from my friend and respond. Important because it verifies I was awake. I started getting very uncomfortable, and then I heard a knock at my door. I walk around and peek out the window, and there's a girl there. I can't see anything other than her white hoodie, which is up, and long dark hair coming out of it. She knocks, then knocks again, not urgently or anything, but she didn't appear intent on leaving. So, stupidly, in retrospect, looking back on this as a 34-year-old, I crack open the door. In a quiet voice, she asks if she can use my cell. I still can't really see her face because my porch light was out, and I'd been putting off changing the bulb for no reason at all. I ask if everything's okay, and she just repeats she needs to use the phone. Again, against my better judgment, I put my cell phone to the dial screen and hand it to her. I see her hit a few things, then out of the phone to her ear, and the screen light gave me a better view of her face. She was younger, somewhere between 18 and 22, plain, not really particularly distinguishing in any way. She waits for a minute, then says, "Hey, I need help. I need your help." "Yeah, okay." Then hands me the phone again. So I look at the phone, and it's still on the dial screen. Something felt weird to me, so I clicked over to the recent calls, and she hadn't called anyone. When I looked up, she was gone. Not quite vanished, but like way, way down the street, farther than anyone should have been to cover in that time frame, walking away. After that, the nightmares stopped. Potentially related 2 months later, I got a call from a friend late at night, maybe around 10 p.m., who was like, "Hey, want to come over for a beer?" I wasn't doing anything, so I did. I got back around 1 a.m., and my house had been broken into, totally trashed with a bunch of valuables gone. Certainly don't think my friend had anything to do with that, but I do sometimes wonder if that girl was casing my house that night. It's the only correlation I can make between the dream stopping and real-world explanations for that weird experience. The whole thing was just super weird. I was out for a walk early one morning in a forest preserve that's usually pretty empty. I start coming around a corner, and I can see a car that's parked in the grass just outside of a parking lot. I think it's strange, but keep on walking. I'm probably like 50 feet from the car now, and suddenly the trunk pops open, the car alarm starts going off, and the driver's side door opens. I'm coming from the passenger side and can't see the driver, but I get a bad feeling about the situation. I still keep walking on the path and come around where I can see driver's side of the car. A guy is sitting in the car's driver's seat and starts to wave me over to him. He throws up his hands and says, "I'm not sure what's going on. Could you come help me?" I tell him, nah, he's on his own, without breaking my stride, and keep moving. He throws his hands up again and turns off the car alarm, gets out and shuts the trunk, then gets in and drives away. I'm creeped out, so once he's out of sight, I double back and walk the opposite way just to be safe. I walk back probably like the 30 minutes it takes to get to the lot where I parked my car. When I'm getting closer, I hear that car alarm going off again. I'm freaking out now, but didn't want to walk back into the woods again, so I keep going to the parking lot. When I get there, the same car is parked with its trunk open, car alarm going off, and driver's door open. The guy's already talking to someone else in the parking lot. He sees me into the lot, looks at me for a minute, then shuts off the car alarm, closes the trunk, and drives away again. I just booked it to my car and called the park rangers, but they didn't believe anything was weird about it. I'm like 90% sure that dude was trying to kidnap someone. I drove an old SUV back in college. After school, I drove home, which is about a 30-minute drive. I was getting dressed at home when the car alarm went off, so I rushed out and discovered the car door open with the radio head unit and all speakers gone. I was thinking this guy works fast. Reported it to the police, and after a couple of weeks, they found the thief and asked me to go to the police station. At the police station, I was asked a few questions, and the officer told me I had to hear something from the thief. When I confronted him, he told me that he was able to get into my car at the car park near my school, and I unexpectedly arrived, so he dove and lied flat in the third row. So I was driving home with an unknown passenger all the time. When I arrived home and locked the car, that was the time he removed the items, and when he opened the door, that's when the alarm triggered. TLDR, I unknowingly drove a thief back to my house. I'll never forget it. The day after Easter in 1972, we were off from school. To this day, I have no explanation. When I was 15, my older brother and I were hanging out in the yard. Our dad was a very unique person. We lived in a rural area. To our surprise, we both saw Dad walking up the long driveway to our house. This was around 10 in the morning. We wondered what happened as he left for work in his car around 7. My brother went inside to tell Mom. We were curious. He was wearing the same clothes he wore that morning. It was him. No way it could be anyone else. And the closest house was at least a quarter mile away. I started to walk out to meet him, and as I was maybe 100 feet away, I called out. Next thing I knew, he wasn't there. I thought he somehow fell into the culvert. Nothing. I searched. My brother came and also searched. Mom and my sister came out, and we covered that area for maybe half an hour. Nothing. Mom suggested we give Dad a call at work. He answered the phone right away, and Mom in a light-hearted manner asked him if he'd been home in the last hour. He worked as a civilian on a military post about 25 miles away. Mom put my brother on the phone and then me. He denied he'd been home. We again asked him when he came home, and he seemed to be irked, insisted we were mistaken, and he had no explanation. I remember about 10 years later bringing this up, and he became upset and said I was playing a mind game. I'm the only person in this account who's still alive. To this day, I have no idea what my brother and I experienced. I know it was him, I know he was there, and then he wasn't. I guess it's just one of those things. Like as in Superman, on the track there runs 2 trains with 8 or so cars per train. They sit 2 people across and had lap restraints. I was on train 2, which was at the station. While getting in, I looked out at the coaster and thought I saw a falling blob just after the second major drop. I shook it off as I wear glasses and my vision is still trash. Well, we go around the track and stop just before the station. We're waiting and waiting. Me and my family wonder what is happening. We see the car in front of us is still occupied with the riders, with an empty wheelchair next to one of the cars. Now it was a packed ride with long wait lines. Every seat was full except one in the car next to the wheelchair. After waiting about 15 minutes, they finally let everyone off but keep the train in the station. After about 15 more minutes, they send the train and we pull into the station. The ride attendants are in shock and don't talk to anyone. Later, we talked to someone on the waiting guests who were in line to ride the Ride of Steel. They said a man fell out. I witnessed the death of a guy on a roller coaster and didn't even realize it. The guy who died was an Iraq vet, double amputee, who was missing one leg and most of the other. He flew out of the lap bar because he had no legs. To this day, people do not believe me when I tell this story, and my family barely believes me, as I was 12 at the time. I was never really afraid of gore and death, but in that moment, there sits a feeling knowing you witness someone's last moments alive. That feeling is indescribable. One night when I was 15, I stayed over at a buddy's house. His parents were gone and his older brother were looking at us. When we went to bed, the house was quiet and dark. I could barely see his bedroom door open slightly, and I assumed it was my buddy's brother checking in on us, but then I realized that this person looking in on us was wearing glasses, and my friend's brother did not. There was no one else in the house, and I could not figure out who this person was. I was frozen in fear, just staring at this figure looking in on us, when my buddy, who was in another bed on the other side of the room, started screaming at the top of his lungs. I'd never heard a more terrifying sound, and my heart just dropped out of my chest. The person looking at us quickly backed out, and the door was closed quietly. A few seconds later, we saw the light come on in the hallway, and my friend's brother flew open the door asking what was wrong. We both started yelling that someone was just there. The brother grabbed a baseball bat from his room and started searching the house. We checked the front and back doors and the garage, but they were all locked. All the windows were closed. He looked in every closet and under the bed. Needless to say, we spent the rest of the night in his room. None of us could sleep, so we just stayed up all night talking. It was one of the most terrifying, but also best nights of my life. My sister's boyfriend flashed his cock at me multiple times. I walked into the kitchen and he followed me, had his cock in his hand, waving it around, not making eye contact with me. I walked back into the lounge room, asked my boyfriend at the time if we could leave, and when we did, I told him what happened. He flat out refused to believe me. His exact words were, "Why would he do that? He's dating your sister. Stop making things up." So I never told anyone else. Her boyfriend kept doing it, and even did it to other people as well, but I kept my mouth shut because I didn't think anyone would ever believe me. Several years back, on a bright winter afternoon, I decided to take my nephew, then 7, my son, then 3, and my dog on a short hike at a local park. We were walking through the woods on a trail when my dog started barking. I look over and see a man standing in the woods about 50 feet away facing us. I couldn't see his face because he had one of those fur-lined hoods on, so with the distance and the shadows from the trees and his hood from my perspective, there was nothing but a black hole where his face should be. I gave an awkward wave, but he remained motionless, and I had a weird feeling, so I decided to just keep moving and making our way back to the car. I felt like we were being watched, so I looked back a few minutes later, and the man was still just standing in the woods, but I knew he had moved because he was still about 50 feet away, and we had walked quite a ways. My dog was growling, and the kids and I were starting to get creeped out. We keep moving, and I suddenly hear the sound of fast, heavy footsteps in the snow. I looked back again, and this time I caught the guy running in our direction, but he stopped as soon as I saw him and went back to just staring motionlessly from afar, now closer than he was before. My dog was going nuts at this point, and my mind was racing with possibilities. So I discreetly gave my nephew my phone and quietly told him that if anything happened, that he needed to take his cousin and run as fast as they could to the car and call for help. I figured if anything, the dog and I could at least hold the guy off long enough for the kids to get away. I think my dog may have scared him off because he ended up turning around and going in the opposite direction. I've never really told anyone because I don't want to come off as being dramatic.
That protective instinct was strong, and maybe it was innocuous or maybe it was nefarious, but either way, you did the right thing, and I'm glad it all worked out in the end.
I used to work at a store that sold clocks. One day a woman came in to return a clock that she'd bought. I asked what was wrong with it, and she said, "You're not going to believe me, but it runs backwards, let me see," I said, and put some fresh batteries in it. Sure as hell, the thing ran backwards. I gave her a refund, and she was very thankful. She turned to leave, and the second she left the store, the clock started running normally. Not the creepiest thing that happened, but up there. I was in the barn milking as dusk was setting, and I was walking back into the barn, and the dogs started to bark. I walked back out of the barn to see, and they started running to a dark SUV, which wasn't there 2 seconds before, running with its lights on in front of the barns. I wondered how in the hell the car drove up my driveway without me hearing it or the dogs hearing it. I had just been out there. As they ran to the car ready to jump on the side and greet somebody, it vanished. One dog jumped up to put its paws on the side of the car and fell down as the car just disappeared. The dogs ran around where it had been sitting and looked at me confused. I stood there just as confused for a moment. The dogs were unsettled. I said to them, "Well, that was a blip in the matrix," and walked back into the barn. No tire tracks left or any sign that it was there. If the dogs hadn't run around in circles in the place it had been, I would have thought it had seen things. I tried telling a few people after that, but they looked at me like I was crazy. I've seen some odder things here and wonder why. I believe, after what I have seen, that either none of this is real, this life, or that other dimensions cross into our lives at times. Last winter, I was driving down the freeway at night, going between suburbs of a large metropolitan area kind of thing. So there were plenty of cars around, but it was maybe around midnight or so, and it had been snowing when it isn't always white during winter here. I saw a car pulled over on the shoulder of the freeway with a guy standing next to it, clearly in need of some assistance. I saw them as I was driving past, but since it was later at night and was cold out, I figured I might as well take the next exit, loop around, and see if the guy still needed help. I get there, and it's a middle-aged, working-class type of guy standing outside of his pickup. He's wearing blue overalls, slender, is slightly balding, and puts off what I can only describe as a weird vibe. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was one of those weird gut feelings that you aren't sure why you feel. He says that he's been having car trouble, is from about 2 hours out of town, that his alternator is shot, and that his battery needs a boost. I've owned a car with a shot alternator, and know that when the battery dies you need to boost it for a little while if you're going to get it running again. I tell him it's no problem, commiserate with him for a minute, pop my hood, and he says he's going to go grab his cables. When he comes back, I notice in his hand that he has some sort of concealed metal object. No clue what it was. I saw for just a brief moment, and saw that it wasn't a knife, but that it was metal and a little shorter than the length of his hand, and he was clearly trying to keep it concealed from my view. This all happened so fast, and I'm immediately on high alert. I see it for a split second as he's bringing the cables to me so that I can hook up my battery. I instantly take a step back to put some distance between us and tell him that he can hook up my battery and I'll wait in the car. All the while, in instantaneous full fight or flight, getting ready to block an attack if he were to lunge at me. He doesn't, and starts connecting the cables to my battery as I'm sitting in my car. I start to wonder if I was imagining things as he connects the battery, and we both wait for the battery to charge. Maybe it was just something that was bundled in with the cables that he just had in his hand. Maybe I misread the situation as dangerous. After a few minutes, he goes to start his car, shouts that it isn't working, and then walks back toward my car, where he waits in front of my car. After a few minutes of waiting, he puts his head back under the hood of my car to fiddle with the cables. All the while, I'm of course watching him intently to make sure he doesn't come to the car window, because I was still spooked. He shouts some things about how it isn't working and asks me to come out and take a look. I open my window a bit, casually tell him not to worry, and that it's probably just going to take some time. Luckily, I can just barely see my battery in the dark through the gap under the popped hood of my car through the windshield directly in front of me. I see him then fiddle with the cables and hear him shout again that it isn't working, and for me to come out. Then I see him slip out the metal object I had seen earlier and see him touch it to my battery terminal as sparks shoot out from where he touched it. He starts yelling and jumps back as I immediately jump out of my car and tell him that something came up and that I needed to go now. I honestly don't remember much of what he was trying to say as I cut him off or exactly what I said. Outside of that, I needed to get the F out without taking my eyes off of him for even half a second. I don't even remember how the cables came off my battery. Did I pull them? Were they already off? But I slammed the hood shut, jumped in my car, and drove off. I still have no idea what his plan was. No clue what he was trying to do or what on earth he was trying to make happen. But I do know for a fact that what I saw him do is in no way what he was telling me he was doing. But as I left him there and drove off, I was practically pinching myself, trying to make heads or tails of what was happening. And I cannot stress this enough, that the guy just gave off the weirdest vibes. Like, the hills have eyes kind of weird vibes. Maybe he was planning on trying to short my battery so that I was just stuck there. But still to this day, I wonder if I had encountered some sort of mass murderer who had been planning on kidnapping somebody at the side of the freeway as they stopped to help. Who knows? But either way, it was weird as F. Right spooked me, and I noped the hell away from that dude as fast as was humanly possible. I still wish that I had gotten a license plate or something to give to the cops, but in that moment, the only thing going through my mind was just to remove myself from the situation as fast as humanly possible.